Good morning, or maybe good afternoon, and welcome back to the Ocean Stories podcast. I'm Lydia, your host. And yesterday, I did go swimming in the Pacific Ocean. One thing about the Pacific that's different than the Atlantic, or at least my experiences swimming on the East Coast, is that it's scary. It takes courage to go into the sea. And I feel like people with fears don't get enough respect. But yesterday there was seaweed, which isn't scary once you get used to it. But if you're not used to stuff scratching at you and those big kelp pods floating around, that can be kind of creepy because they do look like sea monsters. There's stingrays, there's crazy rip currents, which that exists on the Atlantic too, but the waves on the Pacific are a bit more surfy. They're a bit more gigantic, so they're kind of like intimidating. And then there's surfers in general, which are just intimidating and scary. And then there's also sharks, which that doesn't scare me as much as the stingrays, but the ocean here is alive. I was really proud of myself though. I got the courage to jump in and it was totally worth it. I think I just need to become someone that gets rid of all those fears and just pretends like those things don't exist because the feeling of being in the water, you know how they say that when you jump in the ocean, you get like 10 times your daily amount of magnesium or something like that. I just made that up, so fact check me, but I feel it. When I get when I get the ocean water on this scalp, something changes. And I can't just go in with just my feet or just my knees. It has to be my face and my scalp, my whole body. It does something for me. It really does feel like medicine. When you get out, you just feel rejuvenated, you feel energized. Oh, another thing about the Pacific is that it's freezing cold, which is crazy, but if you are listening to this on June 18th, 2024, Tuesday, then odds are, depending on where you are in the United States, if you are in the same country as me, it is going to be scorching hot. This morning, I saw a headline from Washington Post Climate that said 6.2 million people in the US will be exposed to extreme heat today, which hats off to the Washington Post because that is excellent storytelling. But it made me want to talk about one ocean story in particular, which is the ocean and its relationship to heat and heat waves. Heat waves are the most dangerous weather event in the United States. Not hurricanes, not tornadoes, although those obviously cause a lot of damage. It's heat waves because we lack the infrastructure to deal with heat waves. Heat alerts are stretching all the way across the eastern half of the US. Some cities could approach 100 degrees this week. Pennsylvania, in particular, caught my eye because Pittsburgh hasn't hit 100 degrees since 1995, but it might this week. States that aren't used to experiencing extreme heat are gonna get really hot. And extreme heat kills more people in the United States than any other weather hazard. The risk of longer and more frequent heat waves is expected to increase as climate change worsens. Okay, that's not rocket science. It makes sense. Global warming. Okay, you expect there to be more heat waves. But what does this have to do with the ocean? The ocean absorbs 90% of the extra heat created by climate change. The ocean literally absorbs heat. So the more heat we're putting into the atmosphere from carbon dioxide, the more the ocean is absorbing, and this is all related to climate change. I know it can seem a little bit complicated, and you don't need to know the nitty gritty of it necessarily. You just need to know that the ocean is super important in stabilizing Earth's climate by absorbing heat and carbon dioxide. And the issue is we are releasing too much, and the ocean is like, whoa, 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 whoa. This is too much. So that's why you're seeing corals bleaching because the ocean temperatures are getting too warm. It all comes together. Key ocean nurseries are turning white and dying because the waters they live in are becoming too hot. And those nurseries in these coral reefs are home to a quarter of all marine species. So you're seeing how it's all connected. Humans are being impacted by these heat waves. We're putting the heat into the atmosphere. The ocean is absorbing it, but it's reaching its capacity for heat. So that's a little bit crazy to me. That's a little bit wild to me. I've never lived on the Pacific Ocean before until now, and I didn't really understand what El Nino was until now. Actually, I kind of still don't. El Nino is, I guess, a weather pattern thing that happens. It goes opposite of La Nina. And basically, this is what I know. It makes warmer waters come to the surface of the Pacific. And when there's warmer waters, there's more storms. Just think of it like this: warm oceans equals more storms. That's why climate change is also causing more intense, rapidly intensifying tropical storms. And it really cracks me up when we're at the beach and it's like storming or a storm comes in and everyone's like, we hate El Nino, F El Nino. It just makes me crack up because it sounds like you are talking about a person. But anyways, that is also contributing to why this year, last year, there are so many more heat waves, because it's an El Nino year, which means that the ocean is hotter, which means that there's more intense tropical storms, and also that there's going to be more heat waves. When I was doing research about this, I found a BBC analysis that said that the world's oceans have broken temperature records every single day for the past year. Things are heating up. I don't remember exactly where I was when I learned this, but heat waves, especially in the United States, are also a gigantic environmental justice issue. I find this really fascinating. Extreme heat hits communities of color and low-income neighborhoods the hardest. You would think that intuitively, maybe, but there's a reason. You know, redlining, the thing that used to be legal and still kind of happens all the time. If you don't know what redlining is, it was basically a racist policy that is now illegal but still continues in a lot of places that doesn't allow people of color to rent or buy property in certain neighborhoods. These neighborhoods are less likely to have parks, greenery like trees, shrubbery. Those are cooling infrastructure, and those things actually lower the urban heat index for any given neighborhood. So look outside your window if you're at home. Do you have trees? Do you have foliage? These things create shade, and the trees also absorb carbon dioxide. They're absorbing the heat. So they cool the temperature down. In low income neighborhoods, they have less of that. It can be up to 13 degrees Fahrenheit hotter than wider, wealthier neighborhoods, one study found. Another reason that this is a huge environmental justice issue, which is more obvious, is just that lower income families struggle to pay high energy bills. Here in Southern California, I feel like that's a huge thing. The energy prices here are through the roof, astronomical, preposterous. I'm sure it's like that in other parts of the US too, but usually lower income homes are not as energy efficient. They don't have the new windows and the new systems, so their costs are even higher. So it's really just all these compounding inequalities that lead to heat waves affecting communities of color more. And so on top of it being an issue related to the ocean, related to human health, it's also an issue related to environmental justice, which I find really interesting and important to highlight. Next time you're in a group and everybody is talking about, wow, it's so hot and there are so many heat waves every year. Oh my gosh, it must be climate change. Yeah, it is because of climate change. And now you have a few things that you can say you know about it that you didn't learn from a TikTok, you learned from this podcast. It also reinforces the idea that our oceans play a huge role in our daily lives. It's literally impacting the weather patterns. So if you didn't give a hoot about the ocean before, then maybe you should consider it. But if you're listening to this podcast, I'm assuming you already gave some sort of a hoot about the ocean. So if you're on the East Coast today or in any extremely hot place experiencing a heat wave, be sure to drink enough water. So grab your water bottle and buckle in for today's episode. Do you like my transition? I'm cracking myself up. Today, we're talking with Lauren Landers. She is a lovely lady who lives by herself on a sailboat. She's been doing it for years now. Well, she doesn't live completely by herself. She also lives with her cat, Mako. She is a full-time YouTuber. Her YouTube name is Lauren Landers, if you want to go check her out. And she makes travel diaries of her experiences as a solo sailor. It's really inspiring because that feat honestly seems like impossible to achieve. Like, how would I buy a sailboat, learn how to sail it, learn how to fix it, and then just go to the Bahamas, dive every day, be in the ocean, It just seems impossible, so it's inspiring to see a young woman do it. Okay. This episode was a pre recorded interview with me and Sarah. There were a lot of technical issues, so there is no video for this episode, and I hope that you can still follow everything that happens. Our sailboat interview guests use Starlink Wi Fi to be able to talk with us, which is honestly so cool. But sometimes there are some issues because we are doing video and audio streaming. So thank you for your patience. I hope you love this episode, and you can find all of the links to follow Lauren in the show notes below. So I'll talk to y'all later, and thanks for listening.
Thanks for having me.
Where in the world are you right now?
At the moment, I am in Guadeloupe. It's a little island in the West Indies, the Eastern Caribbean.
And because I know and our listeners don't, with what, are you living there or how are you there?
Yeah, so I live on my 50-foot sailboat, and I've been sailing for 3 years, and right now for the past year or so I've been in the Eastern Caribbean, and so I'm just working my way south to Grenada right now.
That's so cool. Where are you from and where were you born?
So I was born in Missouri, and I grew up in a small town called Joplin, and very landlocked, no ocean around, but we would take trips to the Bahamas every year as a family, and I just fell in love with the ocean and diving, freediving, and then I moved to Florida for marine biology for college, and I started freediving more, and I became a captain during that time. And then once I graduated, I moved on to some friends' boats, learned how to sail, and then bought my own. Definitely timing worked out in my favor for sure. I knew I always wanted to live on a sailboat, like from middle school on, except I didn't know how to sail at all. Couldn't even drive a boat when I knew I wanted to live on a boat. And I had just finished college, and it was during COVID, and so I was working on a lot of boats in Florida at that point, mainly on the dock and just maintenance. And someone I'd met through Instagram, freediver Steph, we met in person like August after graduation, and it's for my advanced freediving course. And 3 days later, she posted that she was looking for someone to help cross back to the Bahamas with her on her catamaran. And I commented, I was like, I will, but it was like a complete joke. I was sitting at work with my boss. We were doing a sea trial on a boat. And she was like, no, please come. Stay with me as long as you want. And so 2 days later, I hopped on her boat and lived with her for a couple months. And then met a lot of people sailing with her, a lot of people that had their own boats, just the diving community. And the next 3 months I spent on another person's boat, just learning more and more. That was a monohull, and I always wanted a monohull. And about a year after I met Steph, I went back to her boat to visit her for a couple weeks. And we just had a great community around. I met so many people, and I'd been looking at boats for a couple years now, but I was like really looking at boats during this time. And I realized like if I did buy a boat, I didn't know how to fix everything, but I at least knew how to somewhat sail now and could maintenance a bit. And I realized I could at least call someone to talk me through a problem or diagnose something now. Whereas a year ago, I would have had very few contacts to call. And so I found my boat that week, and a couple months later, I actually got my hands on it and started sailing.
When you first got on to your friend Steph's boat, were you experienced in sailing at all?
No, I had been on a catamaran a couple times in my life, but I was always like, I didn't know. It was always just a visit, so you don't know anything about sailing, the owners operating all that. And yeah, I knew nothing. We actually motored the whole way to the Bahamas for 36 hours because there was no wind. So I knew that part. She gave me night shifts, and I knew how to do all that. I knew how to anchor, drive the boat, watch navigation stuff. And I remember like the first or second day on our boat, I'd hear the water pump go off. And I was used to bigger boats, and you don't hear all the little systems always working. So I was like, something's wrong. Like, it shouldn't be making that noise. But it's normal. It's normal on a sailboat to hear the water pump go off every time you use the water. And then our generator broke, and so we spent like time fixing that. But on the sailing side, I knew nothing. So I learned how to sail pretty quickly, but I would say if I didn't have friends around, I would have been a lot more stressed than I would have been if I was alone. So I feel like I've gotten pretty lucky and had friends around when things have gone really bad. Especially at the beginning, I was calling people stressed, crying, like I just got this boat, now what? The other challenge, I'd say sailing alone, I actually really enjoy, but I'd say the harder part is going to new countries alone and making a community at those new places I visit, if I don't already know people there. Sometimes it's really easy, sometimes the sailing community is great, and I would say social media has a big role in that because we can kind of see where each other are. We're watching each other's stories. But like right now, I'm not, all my friends are on like both sides of me, north and south. And I mean, we're in contact every day. And then as we sail away, the contact kind of lessens. And then when we know we're going to meet back up, it kind of picks back up. We all check in on each other, I would say. But I'd say staying connected with people back home has definitely become more of a challenge, just remembering to make time to call versus just waiting for every couple months when I do go home and things like that. It's been a struggle, and sometimes I think I take social media for granted, like, oh, I still see what they're up to, they still see what I'm up to, even though we're not actually making contact.
What was the longest passage that you've been out at sea?
I've been from Florida all the way down to Grenada at this point, just that whole island chain. And my longest passage was 5.5 days from the southern area of the Bahamas to Puerto Rico. And that's been my longest to this point. I've done a lot of 36 hours to 48 hours, hoping to cross the Pacific in a year. So that one will be extremely long, and I haven't decided if I'm going to be taking crew or not. So yeah, we'll see.
That's so exciting, but obviously also a little scary. And doing it alone obviously is so different than having a crew on board.
This has been probably my biggest thing I've been thinking about lately, because there's so much planning involved, and you can't just text someone a couple days before and be like, hey, can you come across the Pacific with me for a month tomorrow? So I do need a plan and figure it out. Part of me wants to do it alone because I do enjoy being out at sea alone, and the solitude I really enjoy it, and I don't know, there's something tranquil about it. But then a part of me, there's two benefits to having crew on board, even if it's one other person. For me, I'd say the biggest fear of mine is something happening with the rig or something extremely heavy that I need to go hands-on and fix. And obviously, having another person can be extremely helpful, or just changing sails if rough weather comes, and just having to be on for a long time, that gets exhausting. And then the other part is I know how much wildlife you could see, and I don't know, I'm the person that if I see a whale or a dolphin and the conditions are okay, I want everyone to be in the water. And obviously I'm not going to do that if I'm alone. So that would definitely be a benefit of having people.
How do you do that with the night shifts? Do you just not sleep for a month, or only in 15-minute time periods? That's always my biggest question.
Yeah, it's one of the most common questions I get about my longer trips. So when I'm doing something that's closer to shore, especially by these islands, there's a lot of traffic, I usually take about 20-minute naps. And on the shorter, and that usually means it's a shorter sail, so it's only 1 or 2 nights usually, and it's doable. And I have alarms, so I have alarms to go off to tell me that ships are near. The bigger ones can see me on their screen too, so that helps a lot. It gives me a little bit of comfort knowing I'm on their navigation screen, because they always have someone on watch. But on the longer ones, I tend to take multiple hour naps. If I'm really offshore, the reality is it doesn't matter if you're completely awake staring at the bow, you're not going to see that at night. So that's kind of the stance I take. It's not necessarily the right way, but at least I'm functioning, I guess. and I sleep pretty light, so I hear if the wind shifts, and I have alarms for pretty much everything to if something does change. I've had my autopilot break quite a few times, and that part, it gets really tough. Like, at that point, you are trying to stay alive. You're trying to keep the boat going in the direction and not going all over the place. But when the autopilot's working and the wind direction is staying pretty consistent, so like I'd base my naps. So if I knew the weather was going to change, I would definitely set my alarm for around that time that the weather was going to shift. So I'd be awake when the wind shifted, or if there's a squall coming. That way I would be awake and ready to make any changes I needed. Freediving part is probably the hardest thing about being solo. I'm not going to lie about that, because I love diving, and I'm definitely someone who likes to have someone in the water with me. There are scenarios, especially in the Caribbean, because there's just these little reefs right behind the boat or really close. There's tons of cruisers around. It's not like the Bahamas where you can get caught in a bad current, where you're going to the Atlantic and in rough seas. And so there's usually a lot of mooring balls, cruisers around. So I will do like shallower dives alone here in the Caribbean, probably every other day. But in the Bahamas, and I know Pacific will be similar, I just feel like there's too many safety risks to go out there and do it alone. Because, yeah, you have to make sure the dinghy's not drifting, or you're holding the dinghy, because there's usually not mooring balls in those, in the more pristine places, in my opinion.
Yeah, I imagine that to be tough, and yeah, just like a constant thought of or analysis of like, is this safe right now if I do it alone? You're on the boat with a cat. How does that work?
I got him when he was 4 weeks old as a foster kitten, and I decided I was going to keep him weeks, or I think it was days. Like the first or second night he fell asleep on me, I was like, I'm keeping him. I had just went to visit my boat, so I knew I was buying my boat, and I knew like what my life was going to look like mostly. So I kept him, and I tried to take him like out to the water on boats that I was working on to kind of get him used to it. And he's done great. He doesn't really like seeing the sails come out, but by like night one, like after 16 hours pass, he comes back to normal, starts playing again. So the sailing is probably the hardest part on him. And I'd say I do put a lot of my safety practices into place because of him. Not because of me, but I'm like, if something happened to me, he's stuck on this boat alone, or I couldn't do that to an animal. So I'd say I'm a lot safer because he's on the boat. He is great. He loves being outside all the time. He recently started hiking, so I try to take him on hikes here and there if they're not too long. He loves watching the water. The food isn't really an issue. I try to get as much as I can when I can find places to ship it into, and the litter box stays outside, so it's really easy.
That is an adventurous cat.
I would
cat that goes on hikes.
I'd want to come back as him.
Dog people, do you hear this? My cat is living on a boat, so leave your withholding, limiting beliefs about cats at the door, because this cat is going on hikes.
Yeah, he goes on hikes, plays fetch. Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, has he ever jumped off / boat?
So I think it was like day 2 after we had sailed to the Bahamas. Like, I just got the boat. I went to Florida, picked him up. We sailed to the Bahamas. And it was day 2. And I was like, okay, you need to learn how to swim. Like, we're in clear water now. If you fall in, like, I'm not going to keep a life jacket on you 24/7. That's torture to anyone. So I taught him how to swim, just got in the water with him. And he just, like, clung to me. And I'd try to set him in. And he just, like, put all of his paws out. Like, Mom, I'm not touching that. So I just, like, kept setting him in. And then eventually, like, he just learned how to swim. And I pointed at the boat. And he just swam to the boat. And I have a rope hanging off the back all times. So he did fall in the water a couple days after that. He was just playing and jumped off my bimini top, hit the paddleboard at a wrong angle, and fell in. And he swam back to the boat. And I picked him up, rinsed him off. I think he's fallen in a couple other times, usually when he's playing and running around like crazy. And he swims to the boat every single time. There's one time he jumped off the bow accidentally, and we were about to leave the boat. So I like ran to the bow, and I was just like trying to coach him to swim to the back, but he started to hear me and just went in circles. So I had to jump in fully clothed and like swim with him to the back. But I made sure anytime he gets in, I make sure he's the one that climbs out himself just for practice. And if we go about 4 months that he hasn't fallen in, I usually put him in the water just to make sure he remembers how to climb out.
Wow. So he is an ocean swimmer, but by accident.
He doesn't like it, but he knows how. So I prefer it that way because I think I'd have a heart attack if I'd be like, oh, is he in the water today? Like, is he going for a little pleasure swim?
That is so funny. What if you put him in and he started to love it? That could be a risk. Like, I don't know, cats hate water, that's what they say, but all cats are different. Imagine after the first day you did the training session, he just jumps off the boat. Like, he's a liability, just jumping into the ocean to swim.
I honestly don't know what I would have done if that was the case, because I love that he hates the water.
So, you know that this is Ocean Stories.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that you have a wealth of ocean stories from your time.
I'd say once I started sailing, there's definitely been more. I love anytime I see marine life. I'd say my mom and I have had some of my favorite encounters with dolphins. There's been, I think, 3 different times with her, 2 or 3, that we're just snorkeling or we see a dolphin, and so we get close to it, and then they stick around with us for sometimes 20 minutes. And I feel like, I don't know, I just love the experiences that it's like you get to see an animal in their raw form, like not in a park, but just when they let you watch them and interact with them. I think it's so special. There's been times where in the Bahamas I've seen sperm whales on numerous occasions. They usually haven't let us get too close, but there was one time in the middle of the Gulf Stream. It let us, at least, it stayed at the surface to let us jump in and get somewhat close, and that was just amazing. Love every shark encounter I have. The Bahamas is just filled with sharks, and almost every time you jump in the water you're going to see one. And I've been lucky enough to swim with hammerheads almost every year for about 10 years, at least once. And last year I got to swim with tiger sharks for the first time, and that was a dream of mine for a long time. And it's just so magical being able to watch them do their thing and just coexist. That's one part I don't like about diving alone, is you are more vulnerable in their eyes if you're alone. So I do like having someone else in the water with me. I've studied sharks for a long time. I worked with a shark diving boat in Florida. I spearfish and do dive excursions in the Bahamas, or did. So I trust my thought process whenever I see one. I usually know, like, if I do need to get out of the water, if I'm okay, I'd be okay.
Do you think because you live on the ocean and so near to nature all the time, you have a special connection to ocean conservation and just taking care of the planet?
When you're living on the water, I actually filmed this like 2 days ago when I got out of the water after diving for my channel. And I was just saying, like, the more as time goes on, I get to see the reefs change. And in the Bahamas, I've seen the same reef year after year, and I see how it's declined in quality. And here I'm seeing reefs for the first time, and most of them are bleached. They have algae growing all over them. They've expelled all their zooxanthellae, and it's sad to see. And when you're living on the water, I feel like you're conscious of everything you're doing, what cleaning products you're using, because everything goes into the water. The shampoo, conditioner, sunscreen, everything's going back into the water. Everything you do affects the ocean when you're living on it or near it. And I do think that makes you extra conscious of what you're using and how you're doing things, for sure. If you're not in it every day, it's kind of hard to realize or notice the impact you're having, because it's another world at that point. Like, you don't see it every day, so you're not thinking about it every day. And it becomes like a search. Like, I have a bag sitting on my back deck right now, and I need to go find a trash can. And it's a whole, like, mission to go find a trash can where I can dump my trash. And so I hate using single-use things. Obviously, some of the food we buy, you don't have an option. Like, you have to throw away a box or a bag or something. But I definitely try to minimize single-use products as much as I can. And sometimes that's not even an environment thing going through my mind. It's more like the faster this trash fills up, the faster I have to go take it to land and try to find this trash can somewhere or pay $10 to dump it. And just by minimizing and cutting out a few things in your life or replacing, it saves that time and the energy, and it's better for the environment too. So when I provision my boat, I try to do like a huge Costco run, huge Thrive run, and just get as much like bulk flours, pastas. I try to have the mindset I can make anything I want, but I'm not buying it pre-packaged because then it's gone the next day. It's like, if I want cookies, I need to go make them. I have everything to go make them, but I need to want it and like put the work in for it. And I do like that part about living on a boat because it does make you conscious of like what you're putting in your body. Because I try to take the mindset of like, if I want it, I'm going to be making it. Whatever meal I want, I definitely treat myself with going out to a restaurant every now and then, so I'm not cooking every single meal. And that part, again, like you're thinking about what you're putting in your body, what you're buying, what you can use. And then the shopping part is a whole nother thing. I mean, you can't really meal prep because you never know what you're going to find in a store down here. And so you just kind of go in the store and you're like, well, they have this. Let me see what I can do with this week. You can't really ship things in the Caribbean or the Bahamas.
Do you and some of your other friends who live on their boats full time do for money? Like, how do people afford? Because I imagine those pieces are not cheap.
No. When I first started sailing, I had no money. Like, I was fresh out of college. I'd been saving money to backpack, and that's the only money I had. So I went into it. I got the boat I did, which is huge for one person because I was going to be doing charters. So I did that for a year and a half. But during that time, I picked up YouTube, and that's my main source of income now. And I love it because it gives me a lot of flexibility. I have friends that have done YouTube. I have friends that have tried YouTube. It's a really hard niche to get into. There's too many sailors trying to do YouTube, and so it's pretty hard and competitive. I have some friends that do day trading. Some work remotely for random companies. It's kind of all over the place, but most are remote jobs. But there's also people that come out for 6 months and then they go back to land and work for the other time. So it's kind of all over the place, but very flexible jobs, I would say, for the most part.
That's so cool that you were able to make YouTube work. How was that going in the beginning? Because I imagine you were trying to make it work and you were having parts break. Money was tight.
Yeah, so at the beginning, I had to buy a second brand new engine. I did not have money. Like, I already had a loan on the boat. And right after the engine broke, I had to sail back to Florida. And I realized I'm going to be dumping so much more money. I don't have any money coming in because I was supposed to be chartering right now. And new engine, the installation for the engine this time because it was now my boat and the owner wasn't going to be responsible for that. I wanted to put water makers in. Like, I was stuck in Florida for 3 months waiting on all this engine and exhaust stuff to come together. So I was just sitting, and I hadn't really filmed for YouTube, but I did have some content just in case because all my friends had tried it and kind of taught me a little bit. And so I was just sitting in Florida and I was like, you know what? Let me just start messing around with it and putting some clips together. So while I was waiting, I just started learning how to edit, and the first 10 episodes are absolutely terrible. So I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to edit. I didn't really film to tell the storyline either. And then once I sailed back to the Bahamas, I was trying to film more full time. Like, I was trying to film everything I was doing on top of the charters and all that. And those videos started to do better. And then it just kept escalating. There was a year period where I definitely needed the charters and the YouTube because the YouTube was still growing. And it was making money, but not enough to cover all the money I just spent on the boat and everything that was breaking and general stuff. So I knew it was growing. And I think that gave me the confidence to be like, chartering has to go and I can focus on this. I'd say I got lucky. Like, I'm very grateful that it exploded and I can do it.
Yeah, right time, right space. Sometimes it just works out.
Yeah.
I want to know, like, what are you planning for your future? Are you seeing yourself living on a sailboat indefinitely?
I definitely don't have plans to stop sailing. I love working on boats. I love living on boats. I just enjoy being on the water and boats so much. I don't really see an end to it. I know that we never know where life's going to take us, but there's so much of the world that I want to see and dive. Definitely don't want to give it up before I've sailed to those places, because I sail to go find the clearest water and dive and find the reefs and all the wildlife. So I don't want to stop before I've done that.
One question that always crosses my mind is, do you ever get scared of pirates, or is that not such a big threat anymore? Because this is one of these things where I'm on North Sea TikTok, and then from North Sea TikTok I go to, this is how we prepare our ship to make sure that we're not going to be attacked by pirates. And I'm like, is that actually, are there just certain parts in the world where you have to be aware, or what's the overall deal with that?
It's definitely not as big of a thing as I think it could be, or used to be, or is portrayed to be. There are definitely areas where you need to be more conscious. I know a lot of sailors who have done more of the Southwest Caribbean. I know a lot of sailors will turn off all their navigation lights, and we call it going dark. So you turn off anything transmitting where you are. I really don't worry about it sailing as much. There are specific islands where the Caribbean has a really good reporting network, and if anything's stolen off of a boat, it usually gets reported, and so you kind of know, okay, there's been some extra crime in this island or this city, and I will definitely avoid an area if that's going on, especially because I'm alone. And there are spots where you have to be extra careful, and you do hear stories, and sometimes on certain sails you need to go in the dark, so you turn off all your lights, all transmitting information. But there's a really good network here, and so you kind of hear about what's going on. And as a sailor, you can either make the decision to take the risk and go to that place, or completely skip it.
What is your favorite ocean story, or your favorite ocean memory?
I would say it ties between tiger shark dive, but overall I would say it was about almost a year ago, and I had just finished chartering with shark dives every day for a month, and dolphins, and just a dream month, tons of wildlife. And so I finished charters, and I just had nowhere to be for a month, and the weather was perfect to go to this spot I'd been eyeing for quite a while. It's the wind was good to sail there, and then once I got there, the wind was going to die, which is a dream for every diver, just to have that glassy, beautiful day. So I sailed on the opposite side of this island that no one goes to, and went south, and 10 to 15 miles south of this island. I'm in 15 feet of water, couldn't see any land in sight, and just these coral bommies everywhere. So I'm just anchored with no land in sight in this teal 15 feet of water with just coral heads surrounding me. I only had a couple days there, but getting on the paddleboard, diving, the reefs were beautiful. And I think it was more the solitude part, and knowing that I was seeing something that no one has really seen. Probably a handful of people had been there before. And to me, that was really special, and those are kind of the moments that I chase, is finding those spots that not many people go to, where the coral is thriving. You can just tell the marine life is thriving.
Thank you so much for coming on and for sharing your ocean story with us. It was so lovely to meet you and to hear about your life, and you're actually the second person we've had join from a sailboat, so huge slay. We really appreciate you making it work with Starlink and everything.
Yeah, thank you guys so much.
If you guys want to follow Lauren and see her YouTube, her adventures, all these travels, we're going to link everything in the show notes. So be sure to check it out.
Thank you guys so much. It was so much fun.